Got it. Great. All right. So maybe just for the recording, again, today we'll be talking about sort of a couple of areas. So I want to jump into this idea of what do I mean by this need finding machine? What am I talking about here? So I start with the definition of need finding as an active process of perceiving the hidden needs of specific groups of people. Hopefully a lot of the folks here in the audience kind of know what I'm talking about, so I might move a little faster through this. But one of the things that I think is really important about this definition and why I like putting it up is that it specifically calls out that need finding is an active process. So it's something that we actually do in our professional practice. It's something that we have methods, tools to support. And it also is something that we can think about as how can we potentially do them in new ways. And so that was the thing that was exciting to me. How can we, what are the active processes and new ways of doing this type of need finding, and really this perception of hidden needs, and really the fact that perception meaning that it's new ways of viewing, new ways of seeing. And that's something that really interests me in how can we give people new ways of seeing. So in terms of when we do this in the process, so I do like sort of the design council's double diamond model. I do some funny things here where I don't converge it all the way in the beginning. And the reason why, or in the middle, is because in this early stage, we do a lot of need finding work. And so that's often when we're doing, say, user research, we're going out, we're doing contextual inquiry with users, we're doing interviews, but we also do a lot of need finding when we start to do prototyping, when we start to develop, especially those of us who are creating really lightweight prototypes early on. And this was something, as I was doing my own design work, found that I was doing a lot of need finding and learning a lot about people and what people actually were really wanting to get out of something when I started putting really lightweight prototypes in front of people. And it was also something where in a lot of ways, that's where the rubber meets the road. Whereas sometimes I would do things where people would say, oh yeah, it's really exciting that you're talking to me, but then you give them an idea and they go, no, I don't want that. I actually really value that when I can learn that, because it also opens up a new conversation about, well, then what is it that I'm missing here as a designer? So the other thing that's interesting is that if we think about this final point of convergence as when we ship a product. Now, remember, I come from a physical product background. It used to be that we would really, ship something and then that might be it. We might not actually learn much unless people either back in the old days where they would fill out a comment card that we might mail them, or today where they might tweet. They might tweet about a product, or they might post a review of something. We might learn something more. Now, that being said, there's been so many more ways of doing this in the digital world where we can have remote telemetry, we can collect actual feedback of usage and usability. We can also engage with people more actively via online settings like this, where we can call people up and talk to them, say while they're using something, or maybe right after they've had an experience. And so I was really interested to see how might we be able to take some of these methods that we have in the digital world and apply those to more physical settings. There we go. So in terms of the need finding, when I talk about need finding, this is often an activity that's done between a designer and a person. So this is usually a direct interaction where I'm getting in your environment, I'm talking with you directly, and I'm able to sort of understand your world and your interaction with things. There's tons of methods that have been developed and that I actually really build my work on. And especially as we start to transition from doing all of these things in person to doing them remotely. So things like remote ethnography and usability is becoming much more popular. I imagine many of you here in the audience have done this. And there's all kinds of strategies and techniques that you might be now manipulating or updating to this: contextual inquiry, design probes, experience sampling techniques. So these are sort of some of the foundational things. Where I sort of try to build on in this case is thinking about how we might be able to use the devices and the systems that we're building as a conduit for this need-finding conversation. So this is a little bit of a goofy example, but I do like to think about this as something that we might be able to do today, which is imagine that you're a homeware designer, you're tasked with designing a new toaster, and this toaster is going to have AI capabilities. We're going to put a chip in it. It's going to have computer vision, and it's going to have voice interaction. And as our role as interaction designers is really to think about, well, what does that interaction look like? for someone. Now, that's what this sort of feedback loop here is the interaction between the device and the person. However, what's really interesting, because we now have a chip, we have a compute in this, and likely we have a connection, we also can have this really interesting feedback loop between the device and the designer. And this is interesting because, of course, you can have that data sort of telemetry coming back, but you also have the capability of sort of controlling that device, changing that device, making an update. Or in the case of where I was thinking was actually acting as the device. So you could sort of be the toaster. And this is where sort of my work in sort of Wizard of Oz prototyping, where I was doing a lot of stuff in the lab, I thought, what if we could pull this out more into the real world? Because we have network connectivity to basically anywhere with a cell phone connection. Now, the exciting thing about this is that we can really put these devices out in real context. So rather than having to bring people into our usability labs with, say, the one-way mirror, we can actually put these devices out in people's homes and use them as both a mixed way of doing kind of contextual inquiry while also trying to interactively prototype new experiences. So in terms of what this need-finding machines are, is sort of these devices. And this is sort of what I kind of consider myself as a designer of need-finding machines. But in addition, not only do I build these types of devices, I also observe how professional designers use this in practice and how it sort of changes the way in which they do their design work. And so just as a point of definition, a need-finding machine, as I think about it, is a product that designers interact through. So you act as the object in a way to understand user needs in relation to a specific context. Additionally, these are embedded in some product and device that is itself embedded in the user's everyday environment and everyday life. So again, there's a really big push to get out into the real world so that you're fully contextually situated. So, all right, that's kind of a high-level overview and kind of an example. Let me show you what this actually looks like when we put it into practice. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about some work where we were doing remote observation and contextual inquiry with people using advanced driving assistance systems in Renault vehicles. And the question that their interaction design team had was, how can we actually understand drivers' experience with currently available autonomous systems? And the interesting thing here is that drivers in the cars, they actually have lots of telemetry data coming from, say, the adaptive cruise control system, the active lane keeping and steering systems. However, that telemetry doesn't actually give their design team an understanding of what it's like to really sit in the car. How does it feel when you're in the car? How are people actually responding to these automatic systems when they engage? And so that was something where we tried to basically build a system that would allow them to understand that real experience, as opposed to just the telemetry alone, which they really couldn't glean what the user's experience was from that. So to do this, we basically employ a remote Wizard of Oz setup where you have a wizard who actually has live video and telemetry data streaming back from the vehicle. We mediate that with some technologies, so a video client, we've got a couple of data communication technologies, and then we set this up in a vehicle so that it's actually out on the road and real drivers are interacting with this. Now, in our case, we're doing purely speech-based interaction. We're not doing any visual interaction because it's quite dangerous and distracting on the road. One of the other things that's interesting here, and again, as we kind of think back to that need-finding machine, is we also situate this where the car talks or the system talks. So of course, we could do this where you could be on a Zoom call and you could speak to someone, so person to person. But in this case, I really wanted to explore what would it be like if a machine were to ask, in some ways, our kind of contextual inquiry questions. And I'll talk a little bit about how that sort of plays out later on. So what I want to show you now is an example of what this looks like. In this case, this is a driver who's in a Tesla. So we were trying this in a Tesla vehicle. And I actually happen to be the wizard. This was one of our early tests. And I'm going to ask the driver a question about their experience. Can I just, Anna, just a quick thumbs up when the sound comes on, just to make sure that the audio is coming through.
What are you paying attention to right now?
almost nothing. No, no. I'm looking to straight in front of me. But I think that's useless because the system looks really, really good.
So in this case, the driver is fully hands-off. They're in a self-driving mode while they're on the freeway and they yawn. I noticed this and I asked them, what are you paying attention to? And they actually recognize a little bit that they may not be paying attention to much. Now, for those who have done any work in the autonomy space, this is a commonly known problem of vigilance. People will get tired, they will get bored if they have nothing to do. But it's quite interesting, and it was really impactful for the design team to see it happen in person, right? We can read about it in studies, but to actually see it. What's interesting here is also to hear from the perspective of the driver, like what are they paying attention to? And the fact that they sort of recognize, oh, and it's quite, and this is something that was really powerful for the team to see. Now, on the back end, this is sort of what things look like. So we've got a control station where you've got multi-channel video. So you can see that view that you saw there. We can see out the front of the vehicle. So in this case, we always want to make sure that, especially in a driving context, that the remote wizard is aware of what's going on in the surrounding situation, and they're not just focused in only on the person. That's both from a safety perspective, so they're asking questions at a good time, but also so that they have an understanding of what is the person potentially seeing, and can they ask questions, say, about the context and the things that are happening around the vehicle. In addition, here on the right, we have a live telemetry screen, as well as the control things where people can send messages to type. So again, they're sending these messages and the computer speaks them out. We also have some common questions here, and there was a language thing. We actually did this study in English, French, and Japanese, which was really fun. But the telemetry, the live telemetry dashboard is really nice because we can also see when certain systems engage. So for example, in this case, this is an example of the automatic braking system engaging. You see that yellow highlight, and you see that the ICC, or the intelligent cruise control, is on and engaged. In the car, what this looks like is basically a number of sensors. So cameras, we can put different types of electromechanical sensors. We have a microphone, we have a speaker. We can do touchscreen-based interfaces. If we were to say prototype that, I've had other researchers do that type of work. And then we basically have a 4G router that allows us to send all this back in near real time. And that's been one of the really interesting things, is that we can actually pipe this much data, 4 HD cameras stitched together and a bunch of data from live from the cars, so that we can really see this in that mission control fashion. Back then, it looked like this, which was a mobile studio box. This is like a 2U rack mount case where we'd have a laptop and a video mixer. I'll say that things have gotten a lot smaller, and I've iterated on the system, and it actually now is just a couple of cell phones, and I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later. But in the car, we also had some power management things that we were doing here to kind of really make this quite robust. So we did a deployment with Renault. We did 12 interaction sessions where people drove their daily commutes home. We were in the Bay Area at the time, so that meant 30 to 90 minute commutes over 10 to 60 miles. And we had 9 professional engineers and designers who actually acted as the wizard. So in that early session, I was the wizard, but we actually engaged some of their engineers and their interaction design team to be the wizards and sort of ask questions in this case. Here's an example of what it looks like in a Renault vehicle. So again, this is a vehicle where we have access to all that telemetry. And you'll see here that on the other side, this is actually a controls engineer. And she happened to be very interested in how safe the vehicle feels when it's engaging the automatic braking.
Did you feel the system intervene to brake?
Yes.
Did you feel that was safe?
Yes, I felt it was pretty smooth, and it started applying the brakes about when I would have, so it was, it felt early enough that I didn't need to intervene myself.
So in this case, as I said, that controls engineer was really interested in understanding, actually, could they feel the brakes? Does it feel safe? And that's something where this type of contextual sort of inquiry information is really important, because while they can sit there and actually define, say, a acceleration and a jerk curve, which basically says, okay, this is smooth, and we might be able to mathematically define what smooth is, it doesn't always give them a sense of what does it actually feel like when you're on the road. And so this was something they were really excited to be able to see and to sort of to interrogate with people. I'll show another example where, in this case, the car automatically brakes, and you see quite a sort of a stark reaction from the driver, and then the remote wizard in this case wants to understand sort of how they kind of navigated that automatic braking.
Whoa.
The next exit is what you would take.
Okay, that really scared me, just to let you know. All the traffic stopped and I was on cruise control, because I normally wouldn't be on cruise control, but the car really slowed down. It was nicely.
Can you tell me more?
Well, I was traveling, my set rate, which I think it was around 68, maybe 65, and all the traffic came to a crawl about 20 miles an hour, and I was a little distracted, but the car just totally slowed down. I slowed down and cars were going faster than me on my sides, and then everybody slowed. So my car actually slowed down first. So it just scared me because I'm not used to it, but I think that I would like that if I were using cruise control.
So in this case, the car automatically brakes, and you can actually see that the driver goes, whoa, right, as sort of a little bit of a kind of a shock there, although they recognize what's going on. And so what's interesting about this clip, and one of the reasons I like showing it, is because it shows how we're able to really understand experience tightly coupled to the moment that certain types of autonomous actions happen. If we were to do this where we say had a driver go out, utilize a car, say on their commute, and then do a post-driving session study, they may remember this. This one is actually something they might remember, but there's many types of instances where, by the time you're 20 minutes out of your drive, you're not going to remember what happened in that one moment during the third time that the car hit the brakes. So that's one of the nice things about being situated, even if we're remote, is actually being able to ask those questions really tightly coupled to the experience that people are having. I'll show one more clip here. This one goes back actually to the our test in the Tesla. It's a slightly different one in the fact that it actually has very little to do with the autonomy of the car, but it has a lot to do with the entire holistic experience of being in a vehicle. And the fact that you can actually understand and sort of ask questions about these sort of broader experiences, as opposed to only being able to ask questions about data that you can collect. There we go.
How is the build quality?
Not that good. Not that good. This car is roughly 130 km, I think. So I think it's not good enough.
So in this case, the driver puts their arm on the side panel, they hear a squeak, they start playing around, and I ask, how's the build quality of the vehicle? And they say, well, it's not that good. And so one of the things that was interesting here and for the interaction design team was actually just saying, oh, wow, we're gonna need to really think, because people are now gonna put their arms all over, not that they weren't doing that in their vehicles before, but that it changes the nature of the experience, because when you're driving, you're really focused on driving, and these small things start to fade away to the background. However, when you're in an autonomous vehicle, all of these things matter a bit more to the kind of experience that you're actually creating for someone. So just as a kind of summary of this, some of the insights that we found along with the team was that, of course, drivers can experience a wide range of emotions with the automatic systems. And this prompted the interaction design team to start thinking about, well, how are we going to kind of design for those emotional experiences that people are having in regards to the actions that the systems take? As I've said before, we also recognize that things can become boring, but it also presents new interaction opportunities. And this was an interesting point where this started to be a generative point for our designer, from some of the designers to think, well, what might we do here now that people do get bored or they may not be paying attention? And then finally, the car interior matters, and it matters a lot more. That was really interesting for some of our design team because they were focused primarily on, say, the center stack, but now thinking about kind of how everything kind of plays together. In terms of some design process insights and findings, one of the things that was really interesting was that designers riding along remotely felt like they could see a lot more information than if they were actually sitting in the vehicle. Actually, Melissa Sefkin, who's a design researcher, and she was at Renault at the time, really commented that it was really nice to be able to sit back and observe and not have to make a lot of small talk that we may have to do. There's a lot of work we need to do as user researchers to kind of keep a conversation going. Whereas being in this bot actually gave sort of an interesting alibi to sort of sit back, observe, and then only kind of speak up during certain moments. And for users, it didn't actually feel very odd. We spoke with people and they're like, no, it seemed totally fine. I mean, maybe they were, recognizing that they were in sort of a new experience overall, but it seemed like it was actually fairly comfortable for them to not have to talk the whole time. And thus you could really focus in on either observing things or on asking really specific pointed questions. And so in a lot of ways, we really think that this felt like it kind of, being remote in some ways amplified the ability to do contextual inquiry kind of beyond what we might be able to do if we were sitting right there in a vehicle. So now I want to talk a little bit about moving forward from just say contextual inquiry and working with known systems where you're not manipulating anything to working with systems where you're actually interactively prototyping and changing things on the fly. And so this is some work that I want to talk about that I did with Spotify, where we were interested in understanding music preferences in context, in this case, in the car and in the home, and thinking about new speech-based interactions that the team at Spotify might want to explore in actually how you would interact with your music. So we built DJBot, and DJBot was a prototype built on all of the same technologies I showed before. And we did this in the car, but we also did this in the home. So we wanted to try to explore two different environments. The control interface is very similar. So you can see here, we've got kind of remote controls for the music. We can change the audio. We have some information coming back about the track that's playing. We also can send messages. We have a queue of messages that we might send. We might want to queue up a script. So in this case, they wanted to try different types of interactions. And we also augmented this with a notes-taking feature as well. In the development of this, we found that if we could take notes, those would be time synchronized with both the data and the video that was coming back. One of the things I'll note here that's really important is that Spotify actually has remote control capabilities already built into it. It's called Spotify Connect. And that was one of the things that enabled us to actually do this. We could control a user's Spotify account from our desktop Wizard of Oz station, but they could be out in the world anywhere, in their home, in their car. And that's really one of the core features that allowed us to do this type of remote work. So in terms of a deployment, we did a couple of things here. We did 5 in-car studies, and then we did 1 in-home study. And the in-home study, we only did 3 of them. We did it with 1 user. Our goal there was to try to do a little bit more longitudinal interaction. So what would this look like if we could basically be researching with someone for a week, as opposed to sort of these one-off experiences? One of the things here is that this was a fully distributed interactions, whereas before we were actually in the Renault offices. In this case, Spotify has team members in Boston, in Palo Alto, in New York. At the time I was in Palo Alto, and so we were actually interacting completely remotely. So all of this was basically all web-based work. A couple of years before we had to all do this because of the situation we're in now. A couple things to note here. There's 2 conversation channels that are set up when you're doing this. There's a front channel, and that front channel is the interaction between DJBot and the user. And that's what our designers are controlling through the Wizard of Oz interface. But we also have a back channel, and that back channel sort of represents, again, that sort of we're behind the one-way mirror like we might have in our usability test studios, where the designers are actually talking with each other. And so we were actually recording both of these conversations. So we were interested in understanding the front channel conversation that was happening between the user and DJBot, and that back channel conversation, both through voice and through text messages and notes that was happening between the designers. One of the interesting things to point out here is that this is something that actually is challenging to do when you are in person, or if you're using a room, especially if you're facilitating with someone. Whereas in this case, you could talk the entire time to your team member and say, hey, did you notice that? Maybe we should do this next. So that was a really exciting thing for the team to be able to do that they hadn't really felt they were able to do before with sort of more of their traditional methods. So I want to show some examples of what this looks like from the driver's perspective. In this case, the team here is trying out a new feature of sort of suggesting a song based on the context, so based on being on the road. And we see a response from this driver on the song selection.
This is Iggy Pop, the passenger.
Oh, really? I love this song. I actually played it in a band. I love it.
So in this case, the driver actually says they love this song. They played it in a band. The researchers on the other side are actually like hooting and hollering. They're really cheering because this was a canned song. They just picked a song. They didn't actually build this off of, say, this driver's song preferences. But when they heard that and they heard that the driver had played this in a band, this sort of got them thinking, well, what would it be like, one, to learn more about our users, so that need finding component, but also to maybe try out some new features, like could we do contextual speech interaction around this? And so in this next clip, you hear that they kind of follow up about the music they used to play in a band.
I play the drum. Oh, what else did you play? That's what you asked. Do you know from Golden Earring, Renault? That's a neat one, also fits nice to that. A fool for your stockings from ZZ Top.
He keeps going on actually for a good minute, naming off more bands. And a fun fact was that Radar Love was the other song. They had two songs. And so they really were excited by this. But interestingly enough here, one of the things that was exciting was that we found that through a lot of these sort of really simple questions, we were able to collect all kinds of music that people were excited about and interested in, and connect those with sort of moments in people's lives or events that they were surrounded by. So in this case, you could imagine actually developing a playlist of songs I used to play in a band. And this is really exciting from the perspective of new types of music interaction design, especially when we think about recommender systems, things like getting over the cold start problem, that we might be able to try out new sort of conversational ways of learning about our users' preferences, as opposed to, say, just gleaning them from what they listen to, or doing other types of kind of onboarding or getting to know you activities. So that was something that the team was really excited to kind of play with. The other thing too is that, we might ask, well, why in the car? Well, the car actually happens to be a place where people mostly only listen to music, and actually music is one of the car is sort of one of the best places to listen to music. You have this great sound system, you're alone, you can sing along. And so that was one of the reasons why the team was excited about really seeing this in a contextually situated setting of the vehicle, as opposed to, say, maybe just on your phone or in your office or at home. Although we did also look at that to kind of see the differences. I'll show one more example here of the ability for teams to kind of on the fly prototype, say, new services and think about new ways that they could sort of develop things for their users. In this clip, actually, they're going to recommend that the artist that's currently playing has a concert coming up.
Did you know that TLC is playing on the 15th of July in Concord?
What? I need to buy tickets. Thank you for letting me know.
So in this clip, they recommend that TLC is going to be playing a concert, and that this user actually says they need tickets. I remember I was speaking with Joe Fish K, and he told me at one point in my thesis, he said, Nick, find one need and graduate. So I put this one in here for Joe Fish that I found my one need. This driver needs tickets. But interestingly enough, that it was exciting from the perspective of an interaction design prototyping session to kind of try out an idea, see a response, and the fact that this was actually pretty natural. They just said that a concert was coming up. They actually later on sort of started talking about, well, we could remind you to get tickets and think about sort of new features that you might be able to do in a conversational way. I see a question here, and I want to address this really quickly, which is, did the participants actually know there was a human on the other side? So we actually would tell people that there is someone. We don't tell them who it is. We don't tell them how many people it is. So we don't try to hide it. We also don't try to make a big fuss about it. We do try to kind of situate things as sort of this automated kind of computerized system. But most people do know there's someone there. A lot of these interactions are way too intelligent for people to kind of believe that that they're AI. Although some people do. Some people really get into it, and they actually kind of suspend reality for a moment and feel like they're in that. A lot of that has to do with the stagecraft that gets set up here. I could talk about that at another time, about the amount of stagecraft that we sort of put into setting these up to make them realistic. So I realize that I am probably going a little long. Thank you all for hanging in there. I think what I might do here is maybe just jump really quickly to some of the design process findings here. So interacting through a Needfinding machine, really, one of the things that was interesting is that it really pushed people to reflect on their own values and the kind of company's values in the moment. So thinking about, say, what is our brand? What should our interaction be like? One of the interesting things that happened here was there was a user who had said, oh, I used to listen to this music. They were listening to some Christian rock, but they had said, but I'm not religious anymore. And actually, while our interaction designers were like, wow, I'd really like to learn more about that from, say, a need finding and empathy building perspective, they also stepped back and said, is Spotify really, say, the brand that asks you these really deep personal questions? So that was kind of interesting that they could do this sort of in the moment reflection. And again, a lot of that is because this background conversation that they're able to have, because they're not in the room with someone, they're actually completely behind the scenes. Also, of course, just the fact that people were able to do distributed design work. This is something that the Spotify team said was really great, and really something that they could imagine, especially when we did this in 2018, that for global teams, this could really, really be a powerful way of doing work and understanding how people are interacting with things in the real world. And finally, there was also just, again, that kind of ability to be flexible about what you focus on. Because you're behind that bot alibi, you can sort of focus on different things. And also, if you're doing this collaboratively, you can sort of take different roles. So in some cases, some people would do the music selection, while then they would be the speech agent, and sometimes they'd switch and try out different roles in this case. And all of that could be really fluid and dynamic because it was behind the scenes. All right, I'm gonna end quickly by just talking a little bit about what some of the work that I'm doing next, some of the questions that I have, and I'd love to get questions from the audience. One of the things that I'm really interested in is seeing how far we can go, for how long we can go. I did do a session like this where I actually was DJing for someone on an entire road trip, and we did a multi-car. So this was multiple people in the car interacting with each other, trying to negotiate what music to play, and this was a multi-day sort of adventure that they were on. This was a really exciting thing. We learned a lot of really interesting stories and thought a little bit about how you might do multi-person interaction in these types of speech systems. Also, I've been looking at different environments and thinking where we might be able to go beyond, say, just the automotive things I've shown in sort of a near neighbor. I've been doing a lot of work recently in automated farm equipment. So we're trying to understand how tractor operators who have semi-autonomous tractors are doing supervisory control. Here's a video clip of what this actually looks like. So in this video clip, actually, the driver is sort of leaning back. They're kind of taking a break. But then what ends up happening is there's a rock. And even though the computer vision system is keeping that cultivator in line straight, it doesn't know what rocks are, and thus it can't lift the cultivator so that it doesn't break off the tines. And so they actually have to be paying attention to that. We're thinking about maybe, there's maybe some opportunities there for that. Again, we can also ask about and have a conversation with people about, say, what happens as they're doing their work, or what happens when their systems aren't working. In this case, what it looks like to sort of fight with automation. So in this case, they're fighting with that computer vision system to actually catch the rows. And it's actually, we learn later when we ask them the question, it's because this part of the field is overgrown. There are too many weeds. And so, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So this has been a really interesting study where we basically I've done sort of upwards of 10 hours of remote ride-alongs on a farm in upstate New York. And I did this from San Francisco and then here in Pittsburgh. So just to show a little bit, I know I showed that picture earlier of that big case in the back of a car, but actually I had some students kind of redo some of the DJ bot stuff in the home. They actually modified it to work basically on phones. They shipped two $80 Amazon phones and a speaker to a user who they then had them tape it to a box. And then they ran these things in people's homes, and they did sort of remote speech-based interaction prototyping. Some examples of this, this is an example here of a way to build connection actually between users and to have speech-based interaction translate over into screen-based interaction by sending people more information. So I'll show a little clip of that here.
This is actually Nik's Fantasy Lo-Fi playlist. I can send you a link.
So in this case, they're listening to they recommended a playlist from this person's partner, and then they sent them that playlist actually through the Spotify app. Another example here is, again, that kind of ability to sort of understand the contextual environment. In this case, some brothers here are making some chorizo and eggs in their home in Los Angeles, and they decide to sort of be a little playful with the music selection.
Since you're cooking chorizo, I have just the song for you.
Oh, God. I'll jump ahead right here because
Hey Sam, what's the name of this song?
It is called Huevos con Chorizo.
It is called Huevos con Chorizo.
So just a sort of example of kind of the fun, interesting kind of interactions that you can kind of create, and you're still sort of in the environment, kind of able to use that contextual information. The last thing I want to give a shout out to my student Aziz, because he has actually taken the control interfaces, the things that I built, he has made them way better. And he has also added some autonomy to them. So now built into the interface, he's been able to do things like live speech to text transcription and live inference detecting, so that the systems can sort of automatically recommend speech-based interactions to play with. And this was exciting. I'm really excited to try this more because it allows us to look at this future of sort of human AI, remote contextual inquiry, remote prototyping interactions. So what happens when we sort of have AI partners that are doing this work along with us? So this is sort of an example of what this looks like at a very basic level.
Hey Carmax, what's up? Hey Carmax, what's the mileage?
You can see here it actually has put in the answer in this case, so that
this car has 4,244 miles.
It sort of queues it up for them, but then that remote operator actually has the ability to say, okay, do I want to add this to the transcript? Do I want to send that? So this is kind of a new direction that I'm excited about, and Aziz has done some really amazing work here. So, all right, with that, I know I'm over. I just want to give some acknowledgements to the many, many partners that have made this work possible. I've had a lot of collaborations with people in industry and a lot of support from my advisors. So thank you all for listening. I'd love to hear if you have questions, if you have comments, about this style of work. If there's ways in which you think that you might be able to utilize these type of things in your work, I'm always looking to hear about that. So yeah, excited to talk more.
All right, and we're back in our virtual setup. So you guys can post questions in the chat if you'd like, and I'll read them, or you can just speak up.
All right, Lisa, thank you. This is a two-parter. One, are users more comfortable disclosing to an AI bot disembodied voice? And two, are there contexts where a voice bot isn't appropriate for contextual inquiry? Super interesting questions. The first one, I think it depends, but it was interesting that we did see that many people were very open to disclosing to a bot. I've done some other work where it's quite surprising how much people will disclose and how comfortable they'll be, especially when you design your questions to be quite open-ended. So actually a question you may have noticed in one of my videos, we say, can you tell me more? I love that question. I honestly think robots just asking that question can basically pull so much from people. It's something that I think that would be really interesting to test is, say, a great user researcher, someone who just has amazing rapport versus, say, a bot. I can imagine that a great user researcher is potentially going to be able to make someone feel so comfortable and be able to basically engender a lot more trust. That being said, I do think that actually having this bot sort of reduces the feeling of having someone look over you, or it kind of reduces that judgment that you might feel from, say, a person. And even if you kind of know someone's on the other end, right, it still feels, you treat it like it's actually more of a computer. Now, the second part, which is context where a bot voice isn't appropriate. I do think that's a really interesting. Of course, I think any context where, say, voice is the primary way in which you are interacting with something else, like let's say you wanted to do contextual inquiry on me giving presentations in Zoom. I'm talking, you probably can't, you probably can't actually do contextual inquiry in that case. You probably just do more observation. I think also you do need to think about the safety aspects of things. We tried really hard. We have a lot of experience of doing in-car automotive work, in progress work. We do set up a lot of things to make sure that things are safe. So there's a lot of things we do. We train our wizards to be observing the context, to try to ask questions at the right time. And so that's definitely a place where, speech-based or bot voice might not work. I do also think, and maybe going up to that, which is the disclosure part, I think there's also an element where, let's say you really need to build a lot of trust, where a robot just will not be able to get there. I could imagine things like, say, therapeutics, psychiatry, this kind of stuff, where you might be trying to design an experience or a device for that, where just having a person there who maybe someone can feel that they're really empathizing more with, may be more appropriate. That being said, I do think it's a really interesting question and something we could potentially explore in our research. Like, when does this work? When does this not work? And how much do people disclose? It's something I've looked at, but I think there's more work to be done there.
I have a question, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how central do you think the cameras are to this experience? Because I'm imagining part of the difficulty of setup that you alluded to is placing the cameras correctly, right? You have to be there to instrument the car or whatever it is. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. So the cameras are pretty central. Now, I'm maybe biased because I do a lot of stuff where, like, video is so important and seeing the environment is so important. Audio is actually the most important thing. Clear audio is the first thing you really have to get down. If your mic is misplaced or something, you really lose everything. I think that cameras can be supplanted with data. The thing is that in a lot of cases, cameras give you the most information that you can get. However, I can also imagine, and some of the things that I've been thinking about are ways, especially from a privacy perspective, like, what if we were to only use, say, sensor data and, say, voice? So we don't actually have a image of the person, we don't actually see that environment, but we only have that. What can we do there? Placing the cameras is challenging. It's something you need to think about, especially when you're in environments. And one of the things that actually you may notice is a lot of the things where things look really great are fixed person environments. So the environment changes around the car, but the person is strapped into a seat, and thus the camera position never changes. When we moved to the home, it got a lot harder. I've thought about some different ways of addressing that. One thing that we tried it once was someone putting like a phone in their pocket, and you get kind of a first person view. That's kind of an interesting way we've sort of explored. I haven't done a lot in that case. The other way is having multiple cameras. And it used to be that this stuff was super expensive. I was using GoPros and mixers. Now, when you have like real cheap cell phones, like you kind of can ask people to put cell phones around their space, give them a tripod or a mount, and it is possible. But I do think that the video is pretty important. And so you have to think through that. So yeah. Oh, Carol, yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, it's great. GoPros to your shoulder. Yep. At one point, I think, Carol, actually, you and I had a conversation about this once where you had mentioned that like having a drone like kind of fly behind someone. I mean, that's sort of the experience, like from a need finding of user researchers, like creating that experience of like, what would it be like if I could have that flyover view would be really interesting. And I have thought about that and like, how do you create that? I'll say a drone, if it's buzzing near you, may not work, but other ways in which you can kind of create that experience would be really interesting. Cameras are getting cheaper, everything's getting smaller. And so I do imagine that in the future that it won't be so bad. The other thing too is the nature of interactive environments actually having this hardware already in them. So for example, a Tesla actually already has a lot of driver-facing cameras. In theory, there's no reason that Tesla couldn't say, do this. They have the telemetry, they have the data piped back, they have the cameras. There's no reason that they actually couldn't do this type of work today if they were to enable it. Now, of course, I think you need to enable it in a way that you're getting consent from people, likely continuous consent, and people are aware of what they're a part of, rather than it just sort of showing up. Although I think that's a really interesting thing to think about as a design organization of relationship building with your users. Like this is a sort of new way to build relationships. So yeah, I realize that went beyond the just like camera placement, but it's something I've been thinking about recently, is that relationship building, because I think it's so important between organizations, and how you bring the designers more to the fore of that relationship, as opposed to say the marketing team, because I think we have a lot to offer there. Bill, thank you for the comment. And so Bill asks, for the need finding project, it seems like for a lot of the interesting interactions take place in a bottom-up and exploratory fashion. I'm curious about the frequency these need finding moments, interactions take place. So yes, so a lot of things are very bottom-up, they are very exploratory. And that was sort of the nature of the type of work we were doing. We were in really greenfield, sort of trying to understand the space. That being said, we have thought about this as potentially a continuum where you might be able to sort of, from a more top-down planned way, be able to set up these interactions to understand people's needs. So one, it's whether it's setting up a script for, say, your contextual inquiry, where you've maybe refined that script over time and you really are diving in to specific needs areas where you may have already slightly identified or you wanted to learn more about. The other thing too is from an interaction prototyping perspective, if you can, I mean, in theory, use all this stuff for sort of hypothesis testing. You could set up sort of A/B tests among, say, either during, say, a single interaction with the user, giving them different options to interact with something or trying out different ways, or sort of between subjects. So I happen to like a lot of within subjects work, but that's just because I want to understand from from one person, how are they experiencing different iterations of something, but you can do this in that way. So in theory, you can utilize these methods in sort of a continuum across really exploratory work to say more, say, hypothesis testing driven work. So yeah, thank you for the question. I'm curious, I guess, I mean, I might flip it around. I'm curious if there are others here who might be, who potentially have ideas around like, oh yeah, that could potentially be used. Or, I don't know if I'm actually completely open for critique. I actually once had I did have a user researcher once say like, I don't know about this, right? Like I want to be there with the person. What do you lose? What do you lose by not being there? I think that's a really interesting point, and you can't recreate everything. Say, for example, actually doing a ride along. You feel the car with the person. So you can do a lot of these things like feeling what an experience looks like, or you can see a lot more, say, body language, facial expression. Now we have cameras, they're pretty high def, but it's still not the same. So, it's not I don't claim this as some panacea of, oh, this is how we should be doing things. I just think it opens up new opportunities to environments which we may not have had access to before. I mean, even in something simple like going on people's commutes home, the logistics of having a follow car to go pick somebody up after the drive is enough to say, make a group not do that type of work. And so then they say, okay, well, we'll just bring them to a test track. We'll bring them here and have them on a fixed route. Lisa, you have a question here. Do you intend to utilize any sort of biometric measurements in addition to video, audio feeds? We noticed your heart rate went up when your thoughts were on the braking mechanism. So heart rate variability, galvanic skin response. Yes, and we have done this. I'm going to pull back to my presentation to go to some slides here. Is it in this one? So we've actually done this in other scenarios where we are trying to understand for speech agents in cars, when should they talk to drivers? When's the right moment to speak to a driver? And let me close the presentation. And we have done that. We've also been trying to utilize some data analysis techniques to highlight moments that are of interest. Can certain, say, signals be predictive of drivers' interactions or how drivers are feeling and things like that? This is a really wide open space. Biometric sensing is super powerful and quite fraught with the realities of the real world. Temperature changes will change, say, your galvanic skin response. I'll say that I love this question because I actually thought this was what my thesis was going to be on. I was going to put sensors on everyone. I was going to be able to learn about their needs based on sensing things. What I actually found when I was doing my work, and this is something that my advisor had pointed out, that she even thought was like, in a way, because it's radical question asking, like, if you want to understand what's going on in people's heads, just ask them. But the fact that we're so tightly coupled to the interactions that are happening with the devices that we're creating, that's really what kind of sets this apart in a way. And I sort of like thinking about it that way. Let me actually pull up really quick just so that you can see. Yeah, we are actually doing a lot of stuff where we're, beautiful, I'm actually on the slide right now, where we're collecting all kinds of data. It's a super interesting area of exploration for us. And if you're interested in that, I'd be interested in talking more about it. Trying to understand and make sense of all these different biosignals that we can get and how we can use these as user researchers. So I think there was another question here. Anthony, do you think that in-person and remote ride-alongs are mutually exclusive, or might possibly be used both modes of observation at once? Actually, yes, I think you could actually imagine doing both at once. One of the things that I thought about, but I've never done, was in theory now with everyone wearing AirPods, like somebody could actually be remotely talking to you, the researcher. You could be there asking questions, building rapport, but actually have someone in your ear, like in the back saying, hey, I noticed this, could you ask about that? Also, they could simply be doing remote observation. So we had people sort of just log into the remote observation. And one of the things that was exciting for the Spotify team was actually having some of the engineers ride along and just sort of observe and sort of be a part of it. That was one of the things that they thought was really powerful. It was also really fun because there was one day where someone came by in the office and they like looked at Henriette Kramer. I don't know if people here might know her in the industry, but Henriette was watching she was participating, and they were like, what are you watching? And she was like, oh, I'm in this live session. We're basically DJing and like doing this remote interaction. They're like, okay. And they walked past and then they came back. They're like, wait, what are you doing? Like, somebody's driving now. You're talking to them now. And so that was a really cool experience and something for them to kind of share. And I think that's a really exciting thing, is the ability, and of course we do this a lot of times in user research practice today, is showing video, but I think inviting someone to be a part of it and inviting someone to engage, like chatting with you and saying, hey, could you ask about did they think that was smooth? Like that controls engineer, like I think I designed the system to be smooth, but what do they think? And so that's a really interesting way to sort of engage across teams in a way that, you know, maybe they're not allowed or they're not really getting in the, say, usability studio with people, because now they can just log onto the Zoom. All right. Cool. Erica, thank you so much for the comments. And yes, I hope that hopefully people see value in it and hopefully see value in it in a complementary way, right? I don't think that we're going to change a lot of our current professional practices, but sort of this is a way, and then this is what I was thinking about, which is how do we sort of push our practice forward? One of the critiques I once got was, which they thought was negative, was like, well, this is just Wizard of Oz and need finding for the 21st century. And I was like, I remember Wendy saying like, was that a bad thing? Was that meant as like an insult? But yeah, so yeah, it's an exciting space, and I'm excited to see where the field actually is going in the future. I mean, there's so many people today who are doing remote methods that I would love to be able to hear how people are doing things. You know, who haven't seen my work, but how they're doing this in their own practice, how they've figured things out on their own, and how they're trying to utilize new sort of interactive tools to kind of support these types of things. So.
And Nick, I have a question, a comment question. It's about the use of cell phones that you alluded to in the beginning, particularly with the toaster example. I've used them actually very similar to what you were talking about during rides, where I was in the vehicle and had another individual being the vehicle in the Wizard of Oz way through a cell phone. And that's enabled a lot of really interesting flexibility in research. I was wondering if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, so the cell phone, of course, is as a platform, right? It's camera, it's compute, it's a speech interaction thing, it's sensors. I think it's great. It is limiting in some ways, because if you want to say connect to say that if you're building an environment, right? Like if you're building, say, physical controls, you might not have access to those things through a cell phone, although there are ways to get it through Bluetooth dongles and things like that. I'll say that this is actually where I think things are going to go forward. Back when I was doing the work in building things, there were two things of why I didn't make it all cell phone based. The first was I actually wasn't an app developer. Like I write like a bunch of like Linux code and I also work mostly in hardware. But the other thing was that actually we just weren't able to do as much. Today, with the fact that we have so many connections to also web-based services, and the phones are really, you know, we have connectivity everywhere, I really do think that we can push it down. I mean, I've actually been thinking about at some point developing a sort of an app-based version of this, where it's something where you could, you know, researchers can buy their own phones, and then we unlock sort of these features, we unlock these, sort of the video recording capabilities. There's still some limitations, and thinking about that backend experience, that's another thing there is, I think thinking about how you set it up so that a researcher, like what's the out-of-box experience, what's the setup experience, what's that wizard experience, that's something that I'm really interested also in exploring. So yeah, but I think, yeah, phones are basically, I think they're in a lot of cases the way to go. There are some places where you do need custom hardware, but for many things, I think you can do it with phones. Awesome. I'm going to, can you talk about the name Needfinding Machine and where the line is between the Wizard of Oz method and your definition? What do you do call your researchers wizards? That's a great question. So the reason I call it a Needfinding Machine was because a lot of the work that we were doing, that I was sort of doing with this, was building up ways to understand needs through interaction, through prototyping. Of course, there are all kinds of things here where really it does look like Wizard of Oz, but it's sort of this method. In a lot of cases, especially in the literature, a lot of Wizard of Oz is designated as something to test faux autonomy. Like we don't have the autonomy yet, but we know what we want to do, and we're going to test it and see, does it work? It's for usability, it's for user, for elicitation per se. And I think a lot of elicitation, I sort of put elicitation studies actually in the realm of, in some ways, need finding, maybe not full design, idea need finding. But the interesting thing here is that we are able to kind of shift and do that type of sort of early contextual inquiry, which is much more common in sort of just need finding user research practice. And so again, I sort of think about these things on a sliding scale. A lot of it from the need finding perspective, and I write about this, is the mindset you come into it with and your intention with it. If you do want to just do, say, hypothesis testing and photonomy, you totally can do this and you can do it remotely, and that can be a big boon. But I think that doing it in context with the right mindset sort of allows people to sort of do this level of need finding that they might not be able to do if they were simply sending devices out and only getting telemetry back. So that's one of the reasons why I call it a need finding machine. But it is sort of this sort of blurred, everything becomes blurred, and like, is it need finding? Is it Wizard of Oz prototyping? And so a lot of that has to do with intent and how you sort of think about it. But thank you for the question. And I do think it's an interesting discussion. And I mean, I don't know if you have comments on that, or like, no, I challenge that. I think that you need to be, you know, separating it. I will say I had one person who saw this and they thought it was really interesting from the perspective of the amount of empathy you could create. That was also one of the original reasons why it was, I positioned this as a need finding oriented, was because by being there remotely, by experiencing things remotely, you could build up more empathy than with data telemetry alone.
I'll tell you what I do like about this term is, you know, we were doing something somewhat similar at a model, and you know, speech recognition, like emergency room or doctor's appointments kind of environments. And I think talking about it as Wizard of Oz prototyping, we always, there was always this desire in the organization to treat this as a beta and say, oh, well, this is just going to evolve into a product. And this was so far away from product. And I feel like if we call it a need finding machine, that would establish sort of a mindset internally to say, no, this is research for research's sake. And that might have helped us just politically.
Yeah, no, I really like that. And actually, one of the things I was, I've spoken about this, and I don't write this word because I think it's kind of weird, but if we think back to kind of the idea behind, say, design probes, and then also throwaway prototypes, a lot of this is really, a lot of the interactions that we're creating here are often probing interactions. And you still have to build something. So they're technology probes, or they are prototypes. That's another word that I've used for it, where you have to build something. It kind of needs to work in some degree, but you're totally willing to throw it away. This is where actually the nature of prototyping tools, and actually some of the work I'm thinking about, is where we sometimes get limited. I will say one of the challenges, and I've had this with some of my students, is that you know, they see this and they're like, cool. And then, you know, it's like, hey, Nick, like, how do you do this? And I'm like, cool, here's the GitHub repo, and here's all the, you know, web server you need to set up, and you should set up an AWS thing so you can do some messaging. And also you need to know this hardware stuff. And it actually becomes really complicated for those who may not have that technical background. I've been thinking about, on one hand, how do we maybe build tools to allow for it more? But the other hand is thinking about, can prototyping tools enable more of this type of throwaway interactive prototyping for this? I'll say I was doing some explorations and things like, I was like trying to use like Figma and Framer and just see like, you can't do Wizard of Oz prototyping in these tools unless someone here knows it. I would love to know how, but if you want to do any kind of, say, mixed initiative interface, like even saying having a pop-up come up, like, no, everything has to be a clip and a click or like something. And I never even figured out a way to like have someone control it remotely, but I could control it remotely. So yeah, I think that there's some exploration that can be done in sort of our tooling that might allow people to do this type of work, but treat it in a way that's throwaway, that's fast, that it's like, cool, I can build it so quickly. Because I think one of the issues here too is the engineering effort that goes into it. That was something when I spoke with Spotify, they were like, it was amazing. Like, I could build these things super quick, but they could never get unfortunately, their engineering teams to be like, yeah, we're going to build this feature for you, because they had other things to work on. Okay. Lisa, you had a question on how much thought and iteration went into selecting a specific voice for testing. Did you initially A/B test using a human voice versus a bot voice, or was it the intention to use bot voice all along? My intention was to use the bot voice all along. And it was because I had this idea of like, what does it mean to talk to a bot, to have this be a machine that you're interacting with? I think doing an A/B test with a human and a bot voice would be really interesting. The thought that did go into choosing the voice was, at least in 2017, it was simply clarity. I just needed the clearest voices possible that people could understand. And what that led me to was Apple's speech to text or text to speech system. They were clear, people could understand them, they worked. Today, we have so many more options. Google, Amazon, Microsoft all have cloud-based voices that are, some of which are quite human-like. I think it'd be really interesting to test that and to look at that. At the time, those services weren't actually like super widely available. So I was kind of working with what I had. Question here, is a Google Glasses in a retail shopping experience technically feasible at this point? Thinking about a moment of truth scenario. So Lee, thank you for that. Actually, I spoke with someone about this as like doing these kind of like shopper experiences. That was one of the ideas with like the phone in the pocket, but could you do it through Google Glass? And especially because people can wear AirPods now and it's not weird. Like actually, I love the fact that AirPods exist because we could do this in a, like I've thought about doing this on bicycles, in shopping experiences. I do think you could do it. Google Glass, unfortunately, isn't a product anymore that I think you can buy and will stream for you, but there are other systems you could imagine doing cameras. I think one of the things that's a little challenging to do here is thinking about the nature of privacy for those around you. So here in Pennsylvania, we actually have wiretap laws that are quite strict, and you're not allowed to record anyone without their consent. And so, these types of things might not be super doable from a legal or maybe an ethical perspective. Whereas when you're in fixed environments. Now, that being said, if you were to say, have a special day with your super shoppers, like this is a thing, right? There are people who do professional shopping. Like you can imagine bringing them in before hours and having them go around and having a multiple person, like they're going around, it's multiple people, you have multiple researchers, or maybe even one researcher who's like bouncing back and forth and has a whole, that would actually be a really cool experience. If anyone here, Lee, I don't know if you work in retail or if anyone here does that, if you're interested in that, that'd be kind of cool to kind of, I've been thinking about how would you do this in a single research team to multi-point user perspective. And especially in a case where shopping, you're interacting with other people and you could do your floor staff, you could have everybody wired up. That'd be really interesting. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So Lee, thank you for that comment and the thought thread there. Andrew, you can design voice interactions in Adobe XD, though you're still dealing with a screen interface usually. Oh, okay, cool. I haven't tried XD. I need to try XD more. The students they love Figma. Everyone loves Figma. I think it's free. People don't want to pay for Adobe now, although I think Adobe actually has a lot of really good features. In regards to interactive Figma, InVision used to have a great tool where two people could interact with a prototype, user and researcher. Oh my gosh, yes, that's awesome. It's dead. That's a bummer. Miriam, thank you for the comment if you're still here or if you're heading out. Cool. Well, I don't know when we end. I don't know if it's like, clearly I think I went over the talk time and people left, and that's kind of cool.
We started a little late.
Yeah.
Let's see. Last chance for one last question, but you have to ask it out loud. How about that?
Oh, I think it's fine. I'm fine to get chat. I'll read it out loud for you if you do have something. Sometimes people aren't always in the greatest of connectivity zones.
That's true too.
All right. Anthony, thank you so much for joining tonight.
Yeah, and thank you, Nick. This was just as awesome as I remember seeing a similar talk first time. I think your work is amazing, and it feels novel now, and I'm hoping it won't be in a couple of years. I really like your idea of sort of looking at tools and seeing how do we normalize this, how do we build it in, and I feel like we will all need to learn how to do this sooner rather than later. So now you know who to go to.
Cool. Well, Anna, thank you for inviting me. For all here, thank you so much for attending. I guess my contact information was on the slides. I'm easy to look up at CMU. So if you have more questions, if you want to talk about things more, I'm happy to do so. I also, you might see my name come up maybe in some stuff if I'm allowed to like communicate with IXDA on like, hey, interested in talking to students about design work and your professional practice. As I mentioned before, for those who may have joined a little late, me and my lab are always interested in understanding professional practice and learning from real designers, thinking about their needs, and then trying to think about new tools and methods to support them. So hopefully, you know, I'll maybe be able to advertise a little bit in the future. And I look forward to coming to more of these events.
Absolutely. We're here to advance the practice of interaction design, and I think that's what you're doing. So let us know what you need, and we'll make our community aware.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Till next time, we'll announce the September event shortly. Bye. And thanks, Nick.
Yep.